Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Kellimar audiobook. I am your host, Nobody. Today I'll be reading for you 3 sections of the Kellimar audiobook, and that's going to be the Vampire History, Myths of Realities, Volume 1, Section 1, the Prologue, and Chapter 1. Since the beginning of the multiverse, war has shaped every corner and crevice of our existence. Adam speaking with King Vimnir, the last of the Vampire kings. Despite what the modern Vampire religion believes, many key events occurred before the momentous occasion of our universe's birth. The first spark of intelligence came from a race known as the Celestials. These beings of pure energy were powerful but destructive immortals, never once attempting to find peace within themselves or each other. As the eons progressed, they learned to excel at brutality, war, death, and sadly little else. This, of course, meant they preferred a constant state of conflict, far beyond any other form of life. Thus, a grand orchestra of horror would last for ages, far beyond your or my mind could possibly comprehend. For it was a timeless age of blood and war. A symphony of garbled screams, a tremendous blaring that represented life being destroyed again and again and again, for little else than sport. This grand show led to the destruction of as many universes as ages that passed, only to be rebuilt by the few and far between creators. Creators were the only cunning Celestials existence ever knew. Most were female matriarchs to the trillions of tribes scattered across the multiverse. However, life was never so restrictive as to not have exceptions. Once, in the furthest region known in this plane of reality, a male creator was born. In his tribe, any newborn creators were immediately sacrificed to the elder at birth, but the young Celestial's brother Chaos refused to let his brother die, and used his massive power to make the young creator seem normal, or at least normal by the standards of a youthful force of devastating destruction. Under the strict guidance of his brother, the young creator rapidly progressed abilities that went unnoticed. As with all shadowed truths, however, light soon illuminated his remarkable uniqueness. The young creator couldn't help himself and began to toil on his wonders. His ideas were bountiful and filled with thousands of details unique from any other creator before him. Trillions of tiny working parts poured into his creations. It was truly an art form, and one that didn't require the magic of a soul to keep together. The creator was patient as well, never rushing his creations and letting them evolve freely. Unlike others that tore their creations apart and slapped them back together on a whim, still, it was this very patience and constant watching of his work that led to his discovery. He was discovered by his own mother. She was the matriarch of the region, and had already given life to 4 creators in her seemingly infinite existence. Without mercy she looked upon her son. For each time she birthed the creator, she loathed the thought of competition. This occasion would prove no different. She ordered his immediate execution for being found guilty of creating the first insect, a beautiful little creature with a long scale blue body and light clear wings that buzzed. He was then forced to flee for his life at the fruition of his childhood, left alone in a multiverse that never wanted him. Towards the end of their seemingly endless war, the matriarchs had either all become casualties, or far worse, those that were imprisoned by rivaling regions had to endure endless, nightmarish torture. The creators that remained rogue and tribeless couldn't handle the pain that consumed them, condemned to watch every attempt of life be obliterated by either the tribes for territory or by the destructive and nomadic cleansers for no other reason than sick satisfaction. They chose instead to hide in the in-between, the home of the Ancient Ones. After an eternity, it drove these lonesome creators into profound clouds of depression, which in turn made them end their own lives. Due to their omnipotence, they continued to know reality even if detached from it. It was far too painful to bear witness to every inch of existence they created be stripped from the universe by an unending rampage of their own brethren. Written before the war by the esteemed librarian and prince Vladicus, son of King Vimnir, father of Prince Kellimar, translated by Socrates, hidden by Plato.
Prologue. My name is Kellimar, and I am the last of my kind. Many of you would call me, and many of you may think of me, as a vampire. As a sad, diseased human, cursed to wander for eternity, surviving off of blood and shadow. And to be fair, I suppose that is partially true. The complete truth, however, is I was born a vampire, and unlike popular belief, true vampires can never be created through a bite, though in my darkest times I found myself trying. It simply hadn't worked as I'd have liked. We were a proud and sophisticated species that survived on other apes at the beginning of our evolutionary tract. That's when we discovered your species, a little less than 2 million years prior to the end of our own. When you emerged from your caves, we found that eating your flesh gave us extraordinary abilities. The Neanderthals before you had never had such an effect. However, it's unclear if this was a gift from the Creator or simply how we evolved. My species consumed yours, but we did so fairly and kindly, and each vampire only consumed 1 human for every 2 years during peace. It was less a use of cattle and more of a mercy from my ancient kin to yours. They would take the old, the broken, and the deathly ill. This would be enough for them to not eat again until necessary. Still, humans feared what we took and hated us for it. The old books say that we weren't granted our strength unless we consumed your species. It made it our divine right to do so. The ancients were strict about our beliefs. I looked down at New York City streets from my tower just below the Empire State. The year is 1999, and Nix would be arriving in the city soon from what the warnings had claimed. Fireworks were exploding over the Hudson as they normally do, with only 20 minutes for the ball to drop. I sat with a record player spinning out the tune Someday
by Louis Armstrong. It was my favorite of his old music. I'm old now, older than any human could ever be, yet a baby in the eyes of my forefathers. I was already 430-some years when real life, as I would learn to appreciate it, began. The year, unfortunately, was 1492, and I had been trying to evade hunters for months without pause. When they finally cornered me, I gutted the old man, but was subdued by the other three. I had been weak from hunger, trying to avoid detection, reduced to eating dead flesh. It always made me feel like my insides were burning away. Still, I needed the meat to satisfy my wretched addiction. For you see, I care little for the culture and custom of a dead species, a species that yours exterminated. In my mind's eye, I could see the barrel lid being ripped open, the wretched Spanish men holding swords to my throat as I was dragged from the ship, the shouts of the crowd who had no clue about my crimes, but had been loving the show nonetheless. The memories flooded back in with a rush of emotion as I closed my fingers around the glass of Old Overholt, a favorite whiskey of mine. The drink reminded me of an old friend. I restarted the record and listened to Satchmo do what he always done best. Still, I knew the peace was only the calm before the storm. Soon Nyx would fall from the sky, and death would follow. Chapter 1. Don't let that creature out of your sight, Raoul. This thing killed my grandfather, and I'll be damned if we let it breathe another day. The leader of this pathetic group of vampire hunters, as they like to call themselves, croaked to the two empty-minded fools holding my chains. I growled to myself for having been foolish as well. I should have found a more secure place to hide. Still, I almost managed to escape the entirety of Palos de la Frontera's guards and 4 hunters to boot. Admittedly, it was almost by chance they had even loaded the barrel I was hiding in onto the ship to begin with. It no longer mattered, but I knew I needed to way out of this. I needed more time to think. Yet with being blindfolded, hungry, and gagged, I couldn't think clearly at all. I was being dragged into a small cottage close to the road, no doubt the rendezvous for these peasants. The smell of a fire filled my nose when we entered the mud hut. "When will they be here, sir?" the one called Raoul asked stupidly. I knew from my capture he wore a long cape over his shoulders, with a short brace over a layer of chainmail. They all wore similar uniforms and smelled of week old rotting cows. "When they get here. Now shut your mouth before I cut out your tongue and feed it to the beast." On second thought, this thing would probably love that, wouldn't you, you filth? The leader leaned down and removed the gag. I didn't respond. He laughed to himself and tossed the rag away. I heard it fall behind me, but not quite where it landed. I could smell the fear of the one to my right, but felt too weak to attack just yet. I could taste the foulness of Raoul's sweat, and yet my stomach yearned for fresh meat. I could hear a murmur in the heart of their leader, the most delectable course of all. I was capable of shredding them to bits without so much as a bead of sweat. If only my hunger would have stopped making my brain spasm with blinding pain, and my ears weren't deafened by a constant blaring ring. Somewhere in that mess, my mind knew to just wait for the right moment. "Raoul, don't shake like that. You're a man, not a lamb. Damn that bastard. He said he would be here by sundown. I swear, if he doesn't show, I'll slit his fucking throat. I heard the leader's breath wheeze when he finished speaking. The sweet scent of tobacco smoke soon filled my nostrils. My moment came when the hunter on my right let his muscles relax ever so slightly. It was only for a moment, but it was enough. I slammed my weight into Raoul, catching all three of them by surprise. I snapped at the sound of Raoul's scream and sank my teeth into the side of his face, ripping out as much of his cheek as I could. I couldn't stand the rancid taste, so I spat out his foul flesh and jumped towards the sound of the leader's heart murmur. I wasn't able to use my arms, but my powerful legs snapped the chains effortlessly. I went straight for his heart, and with two snaps of my jaw, I snapped through his armor, rib cage, and pulled out his steaming heart. Veins and arteries snapped loose as I yanked back, causing blood to splatter onto my face and the floor. With 3 bites and a swallow, his life was taken in front of his wide, shock-filled eyes. My pupils dilated with a rush of power. My senses had become sharper than any other earthly creature, and the hunt began. The last hunter started sprinting towards the door. Without effort, I was there faster than their leader could hit the dirt beneath him. I headbutted him into the wall and shattered his skull. I could hear his brains and skull fragments scattering onto the ground around, an ever-growing pool of blood. I snapped the chains around my wrists and pulled off the blindfold. I moved towards Raoul, who was screaming and crying, crazed to the point of panic. He tried his best to crawl away from me, but he had already lost so much blood, and I blocked the only door. "Who do you work for?" I asked calmly as I took slow, careful steps towards him. He only whimpered in response and kept crawling away, leaving a stream of blood as he did so. I reached down and grabbed his foot, yanking him back. I pulled back his head and forced him to look into my crazed, bloodshot eyes. "Who is coming?" I asked viciously, and with each word I reached into his gaping wound to gouge out several teeth at a time. "Crimson," he gargled before falling unconscious from pain. I had no idea what he meant by that, but I figured he was telling the truth. I snapped his neck and tossed his body across the room. I was done playing with that deceased scum. I grabbed the one who had let his guard down and ripped off his shattered, greasy head, taking a bite of a chewy neck artery as I made my way across the room. It was little more than 4 walls and a roof, no furniture or containers of any kind, simply an empty shell of a wooden cottage. I sat beside the leader and gorged his entire body until nothing was left but bones and organs. I'd let wildlife enjoy those delicacies. I picked up the rag off the floor and wiped my mouth after placing a few snacks in a bag. I grabbed a fiery stick from their chimney for my pipe. I then kicked the door to the cottage several feet from its hinges and looked up at the moon. It was full, and the air smelled sweet. About a mile away, a horse and cart were coming down the road. I scaled the wall and planted myself on the roof, waiting. I loaded my old stone pipe with hashish and leaned back to look up at the landscape. I took a deep inhale after I lit my old gift. With a swill, I lit off the torch. I held the smoke for a moment before letting it flow carelessly into the sky above. The taste reminded me of better times, before the addiction truly consumed me. A time when a farmer had raised me as a son, before the blood rage took him from me. It had always happened with humans I had tried to be close with. The great green hills rolled one after another. Behind them stood towering mountains watching over the valleys like sentinels. They reminded me of home, and pain found its way into my soul for a moment. but as I always do, I let it go before it could trap me in its dark webs. Regardless, letting go of pain and forgetting are two very different things. The scars on my body fade faster than they can form, but those that linger on my soul will forever remind me of my reality. For nearly every night for the many centuries I had been alive, I had only ever known nightmares, bitter reminders of a wasted and shameful past, constantly staring at those old healing wounds, though it was hard to see at the time that they were healing. It took a while for the cart to make its way up the hilly road. I'll never forget the smell of the man that sat atop the driver's seat, the most delicious scent of any human I had ever encountered or would ever encounter. It drove me a little mad with bloodlust. Yet I was done with this wretched game. I wanted to find the ones responsible for my constant running. I needed to end the war once and for all. I placed my pipe in its leather pouch before I crept to a better attacking position. At the far back right of the cottage roof, I could see his cart and smell his location. "Halt!" The commanding voice of Crimson made every muscle in my body seize. He had the same deep, mellow voice as my father. If not for the smell, I would have sworn it was him. It became difficult to want to kill him from that point on. I had heard my father's voice nearly 400 years before. Still, my craving for flesh had always won over in the end. "I smell blood, Kellimar. I'm guessing my men failed me. I told them not to harm you, and if they're dead, I know they did just that. Allow me to apologize for the wretched behavior of most of my kind. I give you my word, I mean you no harm. Quite the opposite, actually. So please, Kellimar, give some sort of sign you're willing to converse." He spoke regally, and yet I wondered where he was from. Certainly not Europe, perhaps Africa or the Near East. Still, he tried his best to sound as if he were from Britannia. I thought about it for a moment. I sensed no lies or ill intent. Either he was telling the truth, or he was an incredible liar. I felt around for the vampire hunter's half-eaten head. I then tossed it onto the road next to the large wooden cart. "Excellent. Now I know you've been running for what must feel like an eternity. I suppose I'm partly to blame for the most recent hunting parties. Not to hurt you, you have to understand. I need you, for you know as well as I that due to my humanity, I am doomed to taste the bitterness of death. I know that I'm cursed to be a part of this inferior species. I also know that the blood in your veins holds the key to everything. To immortality. To the godlike form that is the vampire." He raised his voice to an excited shout, I presume, and I could see his intention immediately. He wanted power. The use of my people's original name startled me, however. A name I thought I was the last to remember, spoken clearly through a human's lips as though he were one of us. It intrigued me more than anything else ever had. Yet, none remembered our original story. The past seemed like a dream even to me. It was difficult to comprehend a human knowing any aspect of what they hadn't seen. "You know too much for your own good, Crimson. Where did you come about this knowledge?" My eyes met his, to which he began to smell of fear. He stepped down from the cart for the first time. He was a massive Near Eastern man with hands that could crush a skull as though it were a sand dollar. Broad shoulders like that of a giant, he stood well over 7 feet, with no hair atop his massive skull. He wore a simple homespun cloak, truly formidable compared to most humans. The deafening ring in my ears began as my bloodlust grew. I shook my head to calm it. From the only place I could have, one of your kind's libraries. It was difficult to find one that wasn't horrifically burned by mine. My species. The knowledge I found made me love your kind. I understood their hardships, their pain, your pain. I made it my duty to kill all of your hunters, or as I saw it, my competitors. Those last 4, consider them a gift. They were the last of their kind, something I figure you would appreciate. He paused and peered into the cottage. I could see the blood rush from his face. Regardless, he continued smoothly. They deserved what they received, but they were only the first of many. I'm offering you an endless supply of food, the power of a king. Your royal blood deserves nothing less. His last words were a bit shaky. He'd seen what I do, my regular tendency to horribly massacre his kind. Still, he wanted me as some kind of strange leader. It all sounded like bullshit to me. Still, I pondered this invitation. Of course, I knew what he was asking wouldn't work. She was a young woman, a friend. At first, she had been a potential victim, but something in her eyes made me hesitate. I wanted her to be Vampamir. I didn't want to kill her after that moment. That had been 3 years prior to my escape attempt from Europe. 3 years that I still hadn't been able to get over her loss. She had been a good friend, even as a human. I wanted anyone to share my plight with. I knew she would hate me if it worked, but I couldn't do it alone anymore. I fed her my blood, mixed with wine, for 3 beautiful sunrises. And at first it seemed to produce positive results. Her senses had become sharper, her body and mind were stronger, but only for those 3 wondrous days. She and I were together too briefly to have called it love. Still, she was the closest I'd ever come to the concept. We had started climbing trees and cliffs, hunting wild animals such as wolves and deer. I hadn't wanted her to eat humans right away. I didn't want her to be addicted as I was. It made no difference in the end. On the 3rd miserable night, while I slept, she started kicking and screaming in agony. I thought we were under attack, but when I stood to fight, she was wriggling on the ground. Her body twitched so ferociously that bones were breaking. She continued like this until I mercifully ended her life by crushing her skull with my foot. I couldn't do it until she screamed and begged for me to kill her. I buried her and vowed never to try again. The process didn't work, and I knew Crimson would be no different. You and I, we can take only the most powerful humans and start a Vampamir army. We could take this world back from the filthy creatures that have spread across our land. I slammed the back of my fist into his cheek, causing him to fly into the cottage with a loud crash. He rose, covered in splinters and dripping with tantalizing blood. First, don't you dare claim to be my kin with your filthy human blood. I will tear you apart
limb from limb, if you dare to do so again. Second, I can assure you that if you take my blood, it will consume you. My kind aren't human. We are a different species. You can't turn a squirrel into a lion by feeding it lion's blood. His face showed pure fury. Let me prove to you I'm a lion. He removed his traveling cloak and tossed it onto the dirt. His muscles were covered in deep scars. Some were rather new, and others were starting to fade away. He stepped forward and curled his massive hands into fists. He motioned for the fight. A ritual my father had taught me when I was 6 years old. 2 fingers pointed to the sky, followed by a simple nod. When I nodded back, the fight began. Crimson charged me. I sidestepped and swiped my foot into his stomach, a blow that should have killed him, but he only grunted and swung his fist into my skull. I dodged, but only by an inch. It was hard to believe someone so large could move so quickly. I decided to try a different tactic than usual. I jumped above his head and speared down upon him, like a peregrine falcon. I tried to smash both of my fists into his large, shiny, bald head, but just as they were about to crush him, he grabbed both of my wrists and swung me around, sending me flying into the cottage wall. Within milliseconds, I charged forward and slammed my right palm into his left rib cage. They cracked, and he stumbled back. I went for another blow, but he swung his massive hand at my head. I ducked under his arm and kicked the back of his knee. His leg gave way, but he used his momentum to slam his left arm into my throat. I stumbled to the ground, gagging. He stood up and lifted his foot to stomp on my skull. I sat up quickly and swiped his leg. He fell with a crash, and I was on him instantaneously, teeth digging into his neck, moments away from ripping him apart. I stopped and stepped back, waiting for him to stand, licking the drops of blood I had taken from him. That wasn't too dreadful for a squirrel. He stood up and shook his head left to right before he could answer me. He swayed a bit in place, breathing heavily. Regardless of your mocking, I proved I could hold my own even in this pathetic state. As a weak human, fighting is something I've had to do to survive my entire life. Labeled a freak of nature, forced into that wretched underground gladiator pit known as the Madbaha. I've killed so many people. My armor is permanently stained in their blood. Thus the name Crimson was born from the wealthy English that founded that wretched slave pit. But that is my past. Please, help me reach my future. I'm prepared for any price. If I kill you, I asked, looking into his dark eyes for any hint of hesitation. I was beginning to waver, however. Part of me truly wanted it to work. Then I'd die. If I stay human, I'll die eventually, regardless. The resolve in his voice. He was so sure of himself, so confident he could take it. I silently stared at him for a very long pause. Not once did his eyes shift until I nodded and stepped into the cart. Part of me still knew this wasn't going to work, at least not in the way he wanted it. However, I also figured having a horse would be a nice change after the poor bastard died. The horse stomped its hooves twice, and we were off. I sat next to him, scowling at the mountains I had admired before as we slowly made our way through the winding roads. I reached into my bag and pulled out my stone pipe, packed it to the brim, and then lit the swill with a lit torch Crimson had attached to his cart. I also noticed a banner that I had seen before in a gladiator pit I had once used for food. It showed an all-red man and a lion trapped in a pit fighting with a black background.
So you were in Madbaha. I did a few years there. They kept me safe from hunters. As a bonus, let me eat my opponents. As long as they made their gold, they didn't care I wasn't human. That was until I decided I'd had enough. The bastards tried to put me in chains. I ripped apart half their crew on my stroll out of the place. Crimson had this way he looked at you, almost like he could see past your flesh and into your soul. It was the same look I'd admired about my father. I stared back and inhaled deeply from my pipe. You were a legend amongst the prisoners. You were the one who inspired us to fight against them. I finally found freedom some 5 years ago, after 15 years of death and pain. I carry that banner with me to remember my fallen brothers. He remained silent for several miles and perhaps would have not spoken again if not provoked. So what's your plan? Drink my blood and hope for my abilities to come with no consequences? He looked down at his right hand and curled his fingers tighter around the reins. He then loosened his palm once more, looked up at me, and smiled. I plan to replace my blood with yours, slowly but surely. I have a doctor who I forced to experiment with transplanting blood to victims of blood loss. He assures me it's now safe, and we will do it a pint at a time. After a few weeks, we'll know one way or another if I'll die a mere sheep or live with the glory of immortality as a god. He looked far ahead of us into an unknown world only he could see. You should know that if this works, you won't be immortal. There's a reason I'm the last of my kind. He fell silent, and for the rest of the journey, I continued to enjoy my pipe, and he only scowled.